Faso and Mali have imposed reciprocal visa bans on U.S. nationals in response to Washington's move to tighten entry rules for their citizens.
The Mali and Burkina Faso have announced travel restrictions on American nationals after the United States included both the African nations on a no-entry list. The American President Donald Trump has long campaigned to restrict immigration and has expanded his travel ban by barring people from 7 more countries.
Both countries announced their decisions on December the 30th through statements issued by their respective foreign ministries. The U.S. announced on December the 16th that it would fully suspend the entry of nationals from the 2 countries starting January the 1st. In the Malian capital, Bamako, locals and analysts reacted to the travel bans.
Niger is slamming the door shut on U.S. nationals. Reports suggest the West African nation has pulled the trigger on a total permanent ban of all US citizens. The government says it is done being treated like a security risk and is hitting back against Trump's travel restrictions.
Mali and Burkina Faso have issued bans on US citizens entering their countries with immediate effect.
If Donald Trump says he doesn't want us, we don't want him either. It is they who need us the most. It is they who need our gold and our lithium. In the coming years, the world will no longer be able to function without lithium. And the reserves of lithium are here in Mali.
Something unusual is happening at Africa's borders, and Washington is paying close attention. Travel rules are changing, visas are being tightened, and one country's move is triggering a wider reaction. Burkina Faso has taken a step that is being quietly echoed elsewhere, reshaping how Americans are treated at African entry points. This isn't about tourism, it's not about paperwork. And it's not random. So why is Burkina Faso pushing back now? Why are other African countries watching closely? And could this be the start of a broader visa war with global consequences? Stay with us, because this story isn't just about travel. It's about power, sovereignty, and who sets the rules in a changing world. For years, travel between Africa and the West followed an uneven pattern. Citizens of many African countries faced strict visa requirements, long processing times, high fees, and frequent rejections when attempting to enter Western nations. Meanwhile, travelers from the United States and Europe often enjoyed relatively easy access visas on arrival, minimal scrutiny, or outright exemptions. This imbalance became normalized. Not because it was fair, but because it was familiar. But familiar doesn't mean permanent. In recent years, a quiet reassessment has been unfolding across parts of Africa. Governments have begun questioning why mobility should remain one-sided, why sovereignty stops at borders abroad but becomes flexible at home, and why African citizens must navigate layers of restriction while offering openness in return. Burkina Faso's recent visa posture is part of that reassessment. Rather than dramatic announcements or confrontational statements, the change emerged through policy adjustments, tighter entry requirements, stricter reciprocity, and clearer enforcement of visa rules for foreign nationals, including Americans. On the surface, it looked administrative. In reality, it was symbolic, because visa policy is never just about travel, it's about control and recognition. For Burkina Faso, the timing matters. The country has been redefining its relationships, reassessing old partnerships, and asserting a more independent foreign policy stance. In that context, border control becomes more than logistics. It becomes a statement of authority: who enters, under what conditions, and on whose terms. This shift didn't happen in isolation. Across the continent, conversations about reciprocity have been growing louder. Some African governments have begun asking a simple question: if our citizens face restrictions abroad, why should access at home remain unrestricted? That question resonates with the public. For many Africans, visas are not abstract concepts. They represent missed opportunities, humiliating interviews, unexplained denials, and unequal treatment. They are daily reminders that global mobility is not distributed evenly. So when a country like Burkina Faso signals a tougher stance, it strikes a chord far beyond its borders. Other governments are watching, not necessarily to copy immediately, but to evaluate what is the response. Is there diplomatic fallout? Do trade or aid relationships shift? Or does the world quietly adjust? So far, the response has been cautious. There have been no sweeping sanctions, no public confrontations. Instead, diplomatic channels remain active. Conversations continue behind closed doors. The issue is being handled delicately, precisely because it touches on sovereignty. And sovereignty is a sensitive subject. From the U.S. perspective, the concern isn't just Burkina Faso, its precedent. If one country tightens entry rules without serious consequence, others may follow, not as retaliation but as recalibration. This is how visa wars begin, not with bans but with balance. Reciprocity is a powerful principle in international relations. Once invoked, it's difficult to argue against without appearing hypocritical. If access is restricted in one direction, calls for symmetry gain legitimacy. That's what makes this moment significant. Burkina Faso's move reframes the conversation. It shifts it from "why are you restricting us?" to "why weren't the rules equal to begin with?" And that reframing is spreading. In policy circles across Africa, visas are being discussed not just as immigration tools but as diplomatic leverage. They influence tourism, business, education, and perception. Adjusting them sends signals without firing shots. It's a low-cost, high-impact tool. For Americans traveling to Africa, the effects may seem minor at first: more paperwork, longer processing times, fewer visa on arrival options. But symbolically, it marks a change in status. Ease of access is no longer assumed, and that shift matters. Because global power is increasingly contested not just through economics or security but through rules: who writes them, who enforces them, and who must comply. For decades, many African countries complied with systems designed elsewhere. Today, that compliance is being questioned, not loudly, not uniformly, but deliberately. This doesn't mean Africa is closing itself off. In fact, many African nations are expanding visa-free access to each other. Regional mobility is increasing. Continental integration is advancing. The restriction isn't against travel itself, it's against imbalance. Burkina Faso's stance highlights this distinction. It's not rejecting engagement, it's redefining terms. And that's why it's attracting attention. Because if borders become tools of policy rather than inherited habits, global travel dynamics begin to change. Countries start negotiating access rather than granting it by default. This is the deeper story beneath the headline, not an anti-American move, not an isolated policy tweak, but part of a broader reassessment of sovereignty, reciprocity, and respect. What began as a policy adjustment in Burkina Faso and echoed in Mali now carries implications far beyond two countries, because in geopolitics actions matter less than interpretations, and the interpretation spreading across diplomatic circles is simple. Africa is reassessing how it engages the world starting at its borders. Burkina Faso and Mali are not acting randomly. Both countries sit at the center of a broader political realignment that prioritizes sovereignty, autonomy, and reduced dependence on traditional Western frameworks. In that context, visa policy becomes more than immigration management, it becomes leverage. Not leverage through force, but through rules. Rules determine who enters, how easily, and under what authority. When those rules change, power dynamics shift quietly but unmistakably. For years, mobility favored the global north. Travelers from powerful economies moved with relative ease, while citizens of developing nations navigated restrictive systems that often felt arbitrary. This imbalance wasn't just tolerated, it was institutionalized. But now, that structure is being questioned. Burkina Faso and Mali's stance reflects a growing belief that openness must be reciprocal to be legitimate. If access is controlled abroad, it should be controlled at home, not as retaliation but as normalization. This framing matters because it transforms visa policies from emotional reactions into principled positions, and principled positions are harder to challenge. Across West Africa and beyond, policymakers are paying attention. Some governments may not publicly align with Burkina Faso and Mali, but they are studying outcomes closely. Does tightening visa rules trigger diplomatic backlash? Does it affect trade flows? Does it influence security cooperation? So far, the answers are mixed but revealing. There has been no coordinated response, no unified pushback. Instead, discussions are unfolding quietly, case by case, embassy by embassy. That silence is telling. It suggests uncertainty, because responding forcefully risks escalating a narrative. Many African publics already support the idea that global mobility rules are unequal and overdue for reform. For Washington, this creates a dilemma. Visa policy has long been used as a tool of security, migration control, and diplomatic signaling. But when partner countries adopt similar tools in return, the power balance becomes less predictable. Push too hard, and the situation escalates. Ignore it, and the precedent spreads. Neither option is comfortable. What complicates matters further is that Burkina Faso and Mali are not alone in their broader trajectory. Across the continent, countries are diversifying partnerships, strengthening regional ties, and asserting greater control over domestic policy decisions. Visa rules are part of that assertion. They are visible, tangible, and immediately felt. For American travelers, the shift may feel inconvenient, but for African governments, it represents something larger: agency. Agency over borders, agency over engagement, agency over narrative. This is not about isolation. In fact, many African nations are expanding visa-free access to regional partners and strategic allies. The restriction isn't against travel, it's against asymmetry. The restriction isn't against travel, it's against asymmetry. That distinction is critical, because it reveals that the issue isn't who is welcome but under what conditions. As this mindset spreads, a new diplomatic language emerges. Countries begin negotiating mobility the same way they negotiate trade or security cooperation. Access becomes a bargaining chip, not an assumption. This changes how influence is exercised. Soft power no longer flows in one direction. It circulates, and circulation dilutes dominance. For Burkina Faso and Mali, the move also resonates domestically. It reinforces narratives of independence and self-determination. Borders become symbols of reclaimed authority rather than inherited constraints. That symbolism matters especially in countries redefining their place in the world, but symbolism comes with risks. Restrictive visa policies can discourage investment, tourism, and cultural exchange. They can create friction where cooperation is needed. Governments must balance assertion with pragmatism. So far, Burkina Faso and Mali appear aware of this balance. Their approach is measured, not maximalist. No blanket bans, no inflammatory rhetoric, just enforcement and recalibration. That subtlety is strategic, because it leaves room for dialogue, and dialogue is where the next phase will unfold. If more African countries adopt similar frameworks, whether publicly or quietly, the global travel landscape begins to fragment. Not collapse, but diversify. Multiple systems, multiple rules, multiple centers of control. That fragmentation reflects a larger global trend. Power is no longer centralized, influence is no longer uncontested, and mobility is no longer guaranteed by status alone. Visa policy, once a technical footnote, is becoming a front line of negotiation. Not because borders are closing, but because expectations are changing. What we're witnessing isn't a sudden visa war, it's a gradual reset. Burkina Faso and Mali didn't start a confrontation, they exposed an imbalance that many had stopped questioning. By adjusting their borders, they've forced a broader conversation about fairness, reciprocity, and respect in global movement. This isn't about Americans being unwelcome, it's about assumptions being challenged. For decades, access flowed one way. Today, that flow is being renegotiated, and once renegotiation begins, it rarely stops at one border or two. Whether this moment leads to cooperation or conflict depends on how governments respond, not just in policy but in principle. Because in a world where power is shifting, even a visa can become a statement, and sometimes the quietest moves send the loudest messages.